The Galactic Military Academy's central training facility loomed against the purple sky of Nexus 7, its crystalline spires stretching upward like the tentacles of a quantum jellyfish. Below, on the sprawling grounds of the infamous obstacle course, 3 of the galaxy's most feared drill sergeants watched their latest batch of recruits struggle through what was officially designated as Advanced Combat Readiness Assessment Course X-19, though most cadets simply called it Hell's Playground. Drill Sergeant Zexvek, a towering arachnoid from the Sigma cluster, clicked his mandibles in disapproval as a Centaurian cadet face-planted into the mud pit. His 8 eyes narrowed, compound pupils contracting to pinpoints. Another washout, he chittered to his colleagues. That's the 4th one today. Beside him, Drill Sergeant Ethalar, a serpentine Nexulian with iridescent scales, flicked her forked tongue. They're getting softer every cycle, she hissed, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had broken thousands of recruits over 3 decades of service. In my early days, at least they made it past the first quarter, before crying for their maternal units. The 3rd instructor, Drill Sergeant Kabosh, a massive Valorian whose crystalline exoskeleton sparkled with bioluminescent patterns, merely grunted. His species was famous for their stoic nature, but even they had standards. Current course completion rate 12.3%, down 3.2% from last cycle. Around them, the obstacle course stretched out like a sadist's playground. Gravity wells randomly shifted between 0.5 and 3 times standard gravity. Plasma barriers required split-second timing to navigate. The infamous meat grinder, a series of rotating titanium pillars covered in sonic pulse emitters, had sent more cadets to the medical bay than any other obstacle in the history of the Academy. A Floraxian recruit, their plant-based body trembling from exhaustion, collapsed at the base of the neutron wall climb. Their bioluminescent sap had turned a sickly shade of green, indicating severe stress. Medical drones quickly swooped in to collect another casualty of the course. Remember when that Urgolian made it through in 6 hours last cycle? Ethalar reminisced, almost fondly. Now that was impressive. Technically impressive, Kabosh corrected. Still fell short of course parameters. Optimal completion time, sub 2 hours, never achieved. The course had been designed using data from 100 different species, calibrated to push the absolute limits of what was theoretically possible for any known sentient race. In its 50 years of operation, no one had ever completed it in under 2 hours. The current record holder, a cybernetically enhanced quantum warrior from the Andromeda Edge, had barely managed it in 4 hours and 13 minutes. Zixvek's mandibles twitched in what passed for a smile among his kind. Perhaps we should make it more challenging. These new environmental hazards I've been developing. A commotion at the course entrance cut him off. The 3 drill sergeants turned to see a small crowd gathering near the registration terminal. Through the throng of various alien species, they caught glimpses of something that made even Kabosh's crystalline structure vibrate with interest. A human had arrived. The implications of having a Deathworlder attempt the course sent ripples of excitement through the gathered crowd. This was going to be interesting, one way or another. The crowd parted like quantum particles in a magnetic field as the human strode forward. Standing at what would be considered an unimpressive height among his own species, barely reaching 6 feet, Cadet Rex Stone somehow managed to make every alien in the vicinity feel small. Perhaps it was the way he moved, with a predatory grace that seemed almost casual, or maybe it was the quiet confidence that radiated from him like background radiation. He wore standard-issue training gear, the material already dark with sweat from his morning workout. His close-cropped black hair and the 3-day stubble on his jaw gave him a rugged appearance that made several of the more sensitive species take involuntary steps backward. A long scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from what his file claimed was a minor disagreement with a Thoraxian cave bear during survival training. Well, Drill Sergeant Ithalar's scales rippled with barely contained amusement. Look what the cosmic winds blew in, a human who thinks he can handle our course. Her voice carried across the training ground, deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. Tell me, tiny mammal, did you get lost on your way to the basic training facility? Rex didn't respond immediately. Instead, he calmly continued his warm-up stretches, the muscles in his arms and shoulders flexing in ways that made several nearby gelatinoids quiver with discomfort. Their species had evolved without solid skeletal structures, and the sight of moving muscles beneath skin always disturbed them. Registration, Kibosh demanded, his crystalline form pulsing with authoritative light patterns. Documentation required. Rex pulled out his credentials chip and tossed it casually toward the Valorian instructor. Kibosh caught it with a crystalline appendage, his internal lights flickering as he processed the information. Interesting, Kibosh's monotone voice somehow managed to convey skepticism. Previous accomplishments, notable. Combat efficiency rating, exceptional. Survival probabilities, within acceptable parameters. He paused, lights dimming slightly. However, course completion probability, negligible. Zixvek skittered forward, all 8 eyes focused on the human. You understand, meat thing, that this course was designed to challenge beings far more evolved than your species. We've had quantum-enhanced warriors fail, cybernetic champions collapse, even a hive-mind collective couldn't coordinate well enough to finish under 4 hours. Rex finally spoke, his voice carrying the kind of calm usually found in the eye of a stellar storm. With all due respect, drill sergeants, I didn't come here to fail. He rolled his shoulders, the motion reminiscent of a predator preparing to pounce. I came here to set a record. A wave of chittering, hissing, and various other alien expressions of disbelief swept through the crowd. Several cadets actually produced recording devices, eager to document what they assumed would be either a spectacular failure or an even more spectacular death. Ethalar slithered closer, her scales shifting through patterns that indicated both amusement and contempt. A record? The current record is 4 hours and 13 minutes, achieved by beings with technology literally centuries ahead of your species' capabilities. I know, Rex replied, starting to jog in place. Seems a bit slow, doesn't it? The gathered aliens fell silent, the kind of silence usually reserved for the moments before a supernova. Even Kibosh's bioluminescence flickered in what might have been shock. Zigzavek's mandibles clacked rapidly, a sign of either extreme agitation or suppressed laughter. Very well, human. Since you're so confident, perhaps we should make this interesting. Care to put a time frame on your attempt? Rex checked his ancient analog wristwatch, a piece of technology so outdated that several of the younger aliens didn't even recognize it as a timekeeper. 1 hour, he said simply. The silence shattered into a cacophony of alien vocalizations. Bets were immediately being placed, with odds so astronomical they had to be calculated by quantum computers. The drill sergeants exchanged looks that transcended species barriers. They all clearly thought they were about to witness either the greatest achievement or the most spectacular failure in the Academy's history. Your funeral, human, Ithalar announced, her scales now showing patterns of anticipatory glee. Course begins in 5 minutes. I hope your species has interesting last rites ceremonies. Rex just smiled, the expression somehow managing to look both friendly and terrifying at the same time. Better start your timers, he said, walking toward the starting line. This won't take long. The gathered crowd pressed against the safety barriers as Drill Sergeant Kibosh activated the holographic course overview. A 3-dimensional projection sprang to life, displaying the hellish gauntlet that awaited the human cadet. Course specifications, Kibosh began, his crystalline form pulsing with each word. 27 major obstacles, 3 terrain zones, multiple environmental hazards, minimum completion requirements. All obstacles must be cleared, no shortcuts permitted. Medical evacuation equals automatic failure. Ithalar slithered forward, her scales now displaying the official briefing patterns. The first record was set by Grand Marshal Zix of the Quantum Dominion, 12 hours, 23 minutes. That stood for 15 cycles until Commander Vexithra, may her tentacles rest in peace, brought it down to 8 hours. Then came the cybernetic champions, Zixvek added, mandibles clicking excitedly. The Mechanoid Collective managed 6 hours. The Hive Mind Unity achieved 5 hours, 12 minutes. And finally, our current record holder, Ultra Warrior X-227, 4 hours, 13 minutes. Rex stood at attention, absorbing the information while maintaining an expression that suggested he was listening to someone describe a leisurely walk through a garden. Behind him, quantum betting terminals were practically smoking from overuse. Current betting pool unprecedented, Kibosh reported. Odds against 1 hour completion, 1 million to 1. Total credit value, exceeding yearly Academy budget. Several wealthy Plutonian merchants had already placed bets large enough to buy small star systems. The Hive Mind Collective had devoted an entire neural cluster to calculating the most profitable betting strategies. Final warnings, Ythalar announced. The gravity wells are random. Plasma barriers operate at full military strength. The meat grinder, she paused, her scales shifting to warning colors, has been upgraded since last cycle. 3 cadets lost limbs attempting it last week. Those were just the warm-up obstacles, Zixvek chuckled darkly. Wait until you reach the quantum maze. It exists in 4 dimensions simultaneously. The Ergolian who tried it last week is still speaking in temporal paradoxes. Rex checked his archaic watch again. Are we starting soon? I'd like to finish before lunch. The drill sergeants exchanged glances. Kibosh's lights dimmed to alert status. Final course rule. Survival is not guaranteed. Medical drones are on standby. Next of kin notification protocols have been updated. Speaking of protocols, Ythalar added, the course record must be verified by all 3 senior instructors. Any attempt to cheat or bypass obstacles results in immediate disqualification and potential exile to the penal colonies of Drax 9. Rex nodded, already moving into a starting position. Understood. Anything else? Yes, Zixvek chittered. Your species has a saying about pride before a fall. Remember it well, human. The starting horn blared, its sound designed to be universally annoying to all known species. Rex Stone took off like a photon torpedo, leaving behind a crowd of skeptical aliens and 3 drill sergeants who were about to have their entire worldview challenged. The clock started ticking, 1 hour to make history or become another cautionary tale in the Academy's archives. The first section of the course stretched out before Rex like a nightmarish playground designed by a sadistic quantum architect. The infamous Gravity Gauntlet consisted of 30 platforms floating at various heights, each projecting its own random gravity field ranging from 0.5 to 3 times standard gravity. Most species required careful calculations and several minutes of observation to plot a safe path through the gravitational chaos. Rex didn't break stride. He launched himself at the first platform, his body seeming to instinctively adjust to the shifting forces. A collective gasp rose from the crowd as he landed on a platform currently experiencing triple gravity, a force that would crush most cadets. Impossible, Ythalar hissed, her scales shifting to a pattern indicating disbelief. He didn't even test the gravity field. Adaptation rate extraordinary, Kibosh noted, his crystalline structure vibrating with interest. Time elapsed 47 seconds. Rex was already halfway through the Gravity Gauntlet, moving with a fluid grace that made it look more like a dance than a deadly obstacle course. He seemed to be using the varying gravity fields to his advantage, letting the stronger pulls accelerate him toward the next platform while using the weaker fields to control his trajectory. Look at his landing technique, Zixvek chittered excitedly despite himself. He's absorbing the impact through his entire musculoskeletal system. Most species would have shattered their load-bearing appendages by now. The crowd's attention shifted to the next obstacle, the plasma curtain. Waves of superheated plasma flowed in complex patterns, creating gaps that appeared and disappeared in seemingly random sequences. The fastest completion time for this section was 8 minutes, achieved by a quantum-enhanced warrior who had subsequently spent 2 weeks in regeneration tanks. Rex approached the plasma flows at full sprint. The assembled aliens collectively held their breath, or equivalent respiratory functions. Instead of stopping to analyze the patterns, he dove straight through a gap that was barely wider than his shoulders, rolled under a horizontal plasma stream, and somehow twisted through a series of openings that most beings wouldn't even have noticed. Time check, someone shouted from the crowd. 3 minutes, 12 seconds, Kibosh announced, his voice carrying a hint of what might have been excitement. The human emerged from the plasma curtain without a single burn mark on his training gear. He hadn't even slowed down. The next obstacle was the infamous sonic maze, a labyrinth of invisible sonic barriers that could scramble the nervous system of most known species. Now he'll have to slow down, Ythalar predicted confidently. The sonic frequencies are specifically designed to disorient. Her voice trailed off as Rex charged straight into the maze. His movements became even more fluid, almost predatory, as he navigated through the invisible barriers. While most species relied on technical equipment or specialized sensory organs to detect the sonic walls, Rex seemed to be using pure instinct and reaction speed. He's feeling the air currents, Zixvek realized, his mandibles clicking rapidly in astonishment. The sonic barriers create minute atmospheric disturbances. He's reading them like a primitive tracking hunter. The crowd had grown significantly larger. News of the human's performance had spread through the Academy's quantum communication network. Senior instructors, military attachés, and even a few ambassadors were now gathering to witness what was quickly becoming a historic event. Rex emerged from the sonic maze in record time, already orienting himself toward the next challenge, the molecular web. Strands of monomolecular wire crisscrossed the space, each filament capable of slicing through most known materials. The web was practically invisible to the naked eye, and most cadets relied on advanced optical enhancements to navigate it. "He can't possibly see the..." Ethalar's protest was cut short as Rex began moving through the web with impossible precision. "He's using the light refraction," Kabosh observed, his crystalline form pulsing with excitement. "The molecular strands bend light at quantum frequencies. Somehow his primitive organic eyes are picking up these distortions." The human's movements through the molecular web were hypnotic. Each step, each twist of his body was precisely calculated to avoid the deadly strands. He moved like water flowing through cracks, finding spaces that shouldn't have existed. "Time check!" The call came from multiple voices now. 8 minutes 43 seconds, Kabosh announced. "Current section completion rate, 428% faster than previous record." The betting terminals were going crazy. The odds were shifting with every passing second as Rex continued to defy expectations. Several wealthy aliens had already fainted at the potential payout implications. As Rex cleared the molecular web and headed toward the next section, the drill sergeants exchanged worried looks. They had always prided themselves on knowing the exact capabilities and limitations of every species in the galaxy, but this human was proving that perhaps their understanding of Deathworlders had been severely underestimated. "He hasn't even broken a serious sweat," Zixvek noted with a mix of admiration and concern. "The real challenges are still ahead," Ithalar reminded everyone, though her scales had shifted to patterns indicating uncertainty. "The meat grinder will..." "Time split," Kabosh interrupted. "First section complete. Total elapsed time, 9 minutes 17 seconds. Previous record for this section alone, 42 minutes. The crowd erupted in a cacophony of alien vocalizations. Even species without vocal organs found ways to express their astonishment. Rex Stone had just demolished every known record for the first section of the course, and from his steady breathing and focused expression, it was clear he was just getting warmed up. The human hadn't stopped to celebrate or even acknowledge his achievement. He was already charging towards the middle section, where the truly difficult obstacles awaited. The gathered aliens watched in growing amazement, beginning to realize they were witnessing something that would change the galaxy's understanding of human capabilities forever. The middle section of the course opened with the notorious meat grinder, a series of spinning titanium pillars covered in sonic pulse emitters. Between the pillars, energy fields crackled with enough voltage to stun a Kraken-class battlecruiser. The rotating columns moved in patterns specifically designed to be unpredictable to even the most advanced AI systems. Finally, Ithalar's scales rippled with anticipation. No one has ever cleared the meat grinder in less than 15 minutes. Perhaps now our human friend will learn some humility. Rex approached the obstacle at full speed, his eyes scanning the spinning pillars. The crowd leaned forward, expecting him to stop and analyze the pattern. Instead, he did something that made several aliens question their sensory organs' functionality. He accelerated. "He's going to get himself killed," Zixvek chittered, mandibles clicking frantically. "The sonic pulses alone should..." The human's body became a blur of motion. He wove between the pillars like water flowing through rocks, each movement precise and deliberate. The sonic pulses seemed to barely affect him, as he twisted and rolled through gaps that appeared and disappeared in milliseconds. "Impossible!" Kabosh's crystalline structure vibrated with disbelief. "He's using the sonic pulses as timing markers. The vibrations are guiding his movements." The crowd had swelled to unprecedented numbers. Academy administrators, military observers, and even members of the Galactic Council were now present, watching in stunned silence as Rex Stone rewrote the laws of what was physically possible. Next came the quantum maze, a structure that existed partially out of phase with normal space-time. Most species required specialized equipment just to perceive its true nature. Rex charged straight in, his movement suggesting he was somehow sensing the quantum fluctuations through pure instinct. "Look at his trajectory," Zixvek observed, scientific curiosity overriding his disbelief. He's anticipating the quantum shifts before they occur, but that's theoretically impossible for organic beings. Time check, the call came from a high-ranking military observer. 22 minutes, 43 seconds, Kibosh announced, currently 73% ahead of all known records. The human emerged from the quantum maze and immediately faced the nebula chamber, a room filled with swirling gases that could alter a being's molecular structure. Most species spent precious minutes putting on protective gear. Rex took a deep breath and plunged in. Through the transparent walls, the spectators watched in amazement as he navigated the toxic clouds. His movements were efficient and purposeful, showing no signs of the disorientation that usually accompanied exposure to the gases. His cellular structure, one of the medical observers noted with excitement, it's actively adapting to the molecular changes. Deathworlder physiology is more remarkable than we thought. Ythalar's scales had shifted to a pattern indicating complete bewilderment. The gases should be causing hallucinations at minimum. How is he maintaining his direction? Scent markers, Kibosh realized. He's tracking his position through the varying odors of the gases, a primitive but effective technique. Rex burst from the nebula chamber and immediately faced the gravity well sprint, a 100-meter dash through rapidly alternating gravity fields that could turn bones to powder. Without hesitation, he began running, his body somehow compensating for the wild gravitational fluctuations. The betting systems had completely crashed. The odds had become so astronomical that the quantum computers couldn't process them anymore. Several wealthy aliens were being treated for shock as they contemplated the potential payouts. Time split, the announcement came from multiple observers now. 34 minutes, 12 seconds, Kibosh reported. Middle section nearly complete, current pace, unprecedented in galactic history. The final obstacle of the middle section was the neural scrambler, a field of energy designed to disrupt synaptic patterns. Most species required specialized mental training just to maintain consciousness while passing through it. Rex entered the field at full sprint. His movements became slightly less coordinated, but he pressed forward with raw determination. Sweat poured down his face as he fought against the synaptic disruption through sheer willpower. Remarkable, a hive mind observer commented. His neural pathways are adapting in real time. We've never seen anything like this. The human emerged from the neural scrambler, shook his head once to clear it, and immediately oriented himself toward the final section. His breathing was harder now, but his eyes remained focused and determined. Time check for middle section completion, Zixvek called out. 38 minutes, 57 seconds, Kibosh announced. Total elapsed time suggests theoretical possibility of sub-1 hour completion. The crowd had grown so large that the Academy's AI had to generate additional viewing platforms. Species that had been enemies for generations stood side by side, united in their astonishment at what they were witnessing. The drill sergeants exchanged looks that transcended species barriers. Their carefully constructed understanding of physical limitations and species capabilities was being systematically demolished by a single human cadet. The final section, Ythalar reminded everyone, her scales showing complex patterns of anticipation and concern. No one has ever completed it in less than 20 minutes. Rexstone paused briefly at the entrance to the final gauntlet, checked his ancient watch, and allowed himself a small smile. He had just over 20 minutes to make history, and from his expression, he knew exactly how he was going to do it. The crowd fell silent as he began his approach to the final and most lethal series of obstacles. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if a human would achieve what countless advanced species had deemed impossible. The final gauntlet loomed ahead, its entrance marked by the ominous glow of the antimatter chamber, a section where reality itself seemed to break down. The space between existence and nothingness waited to test the human's limits. 40 minutes, 15 seconds, Kibosh announced. Remaining time for sub-hour completion, 19 minutes, 45 seconds. Rex entered the antimatter chamber without hesitation. Most species required specialized equipment just to survive here, where matter randomly flickered between states of existence. The human moved like a dancer in a deadly ballet, his body somehow sensing the safe paths through the quantum foam. His timing is perfect, Zixvek observed, all 8 eyes focused intently. He's predicting the antimatter fluctuations through pure environmental awareness. The next challenge was the temporal dash, a 100-meter stretch where time flowed differently every few steps. Seasoned warriors had gone mad trying to coordinate their movements through the temporal distortions. Rex adapted instantly, his stride changing to match each time dilation he encountered. "Look at his muscle control," a medical observer noted. "He's adjusting his entire biological rhythm to match the temporal shifts." "Time check," the cry rang out from multiple voices. 44 minutes, 30 seconds, Kabosh reported. His crystalline form pulsed with excitement. The plasma waterfall came next, a vertical climb through cascading streams of superheated plasma. Rex didn't even slow down. He scaled the wall with frightening speed, finding handholds between plasma streams that most beings couldn't even see. Ethel's scales had shifted to patterns never before recorded in her species. "He's using the plasma's own convection currents to assist his climb. That's brilliant," Zizivek finished for her. The human reached the top and immediately faced the quantum bridge, a series of platforms that only partially existed in our dimension. Most species needed quantum computers to calculate safe crossing points. Rex simply ran, jumping from platform to platform with inhuman precision. 47 minutes, Kabosh announced, approaching final obstacle. The legendary Singularity Sprint awaited, a gauntlet where artificial micro-black holes created patches of extreme gravitational distortion. It was the ultimate test, designed to be theoretically impossible to complete in under 10 minutes. Rex paused for a split second, studying the gravitational chaos before him. Then he smiled, a predatory expression that made several observing aliens take involuntary steps backward. He moved. His run through the Singularity Sprint wasn't just fast, it was art. He used the gravitational distortions to his advantage, letting them accelerate him while somehow maintaining control of his trajectory. His body twisted through space in ways that defied physics, finding paths that shouldn't have existed. 52 minutes, 20 seconds. The announcement came from Kabosh, his voice carrying actual emotion for the first time in recorded history. Rex cleared the final micro-black hole and sprinted for the finish line. The crowd's collective voice rose to a deafening roar. Species that communicated through light patterns were flashing so brightly they temporarily overloaded the Academy's sensors. "Time!" multiple voices shouted as the human crossed the finish line. Kabosh's crystal structure vibrated with excitement as he announced, "Final time, 54 minutes, 12 seconds. All course records shattered. Completion time, 466%, faster than previous record holder." Rex Stone stood at the finish line, breathing hard but still standing tall. His training gear was scorched, torn, and partially phased out of normal space-time, but he was smiling. He checked his ancient watch one last time, nodded with satisfaction, and finally spoke. "So," he said, looking at the stunned drill sergeants, "is this a passing grade?" The silence that followed was profound enough to be heard in other dimensions. Then the crowd erupted in a chaos of alien celebrations. Species that hadn't evolved vocal cords found ways to cheer. The betting systems, having rebooted, began calculating payouts so large they had to be expressed in scientific notation. Ethala, Zizvek, and Kabosh approached the human, each moving with the careful dignity of instructors who knew they had just witnessed their understanding of the universe change forever. "Cadet Stone," Kabosh began formally, his crystals pulsing with respect. "Your performance was beyond theoretical limits." "Most impressive, human," Zivek added, mandibles clicking in approval. "You have demonstrated capabilities we did not believe possible." Ethalar's scales showed patterns of both admiration and lingering disbelief. "You have changed how the galaxy will view human potential, though I still can't believe you did it all without any technological assistance." Rex wiped some sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of antimatter residue across his forehead. "Technology's great," he said with a shrug, "but sometimes you just need to trust your instincts and push your limits." The Academy's AI announced that all previous course records had been archived and new baseline standards would need to be established. The Galactic Military Council representatives were already drafting emergency sessions to reassess human capabilities in combat situations. And somewhere in the crowd, a young Centaurian cadet who had failed the course earlier that day watched with wide eyes, beginning to understand that perhaps the impossible was just a matter of perspective. The news of Rex Stone's performance spread through the galaxy faster than quantum entanglement. Within hours, the Academy's central plaza had become a circus of reporters, military observers, and curious onlookers from dozens of species, floating holocams broadcast the story to every corner of known space. "Unprecedented," declared High Commander Vexithos of the Galactic Fleet, his crystalline form vibrating with barely contained excitement. "This changes everything we thought we knew about human potential." In the instructor's lounge, the three drill sergeants sat in stunned silence, watching replays of Rex's run. Each viewing revealed new details that challenged their understanding of physical limitations. "Look at this moment," Zixavek pointed with a mandible at the quantum maze section. He wasn't just reacting to the quantum shifts, he was anticipating them. Pure instinct, no technological assistance. Ethalar's scales had settled into a pattern indicating deep contemplation. "Perhaps we've been approaching training wrong all these cycles. We've relied so heavily on technological advancement that we've forgotten about raw biological potential." Kabosh's crystalline structure pulsed thoughtfully. "Course standards require immediate revision. Human baseline capabilities grossly underestimated. Recommendation: establish new protocols." The impact rippled through military and academic circles. The Galactic Defense Council called an emergency session to reassess human combat potential. Several advanced species suddenly expressed interest in joint training exercises with Earth's military forces. In the Academy cafeteria, Rex sat alone, calmly eating his post-run meal while trying to ignore the constant stares and whispers from other cadets. A group of Ergolians, normally known for their superiority complex, approached his table with expressions of reverence. "We wondered," their spokesperson began hesitantly, "if you might share some insights about your technique in the antimatter chamber." Rex looked up from his meal, noting how the crowd nearby hushed to hear his response. "Honestly, I just listened to what my body was telling me. Sometimes the most advanced sensor is the one you're born with." The betting payouts were causing economic ripples across 3 sectors. Several bookmakers had to liquidate entire star systems to cover their losses. The Academy's quantum computers were still calculating the final amounts, but perhaps the most significant change was in the way other species looked at humans now. The term Deathworlder was no longer whispered with fear or derision. It was spoken with respect, even awe. "The implications are staggering," noted Dr. Xanthor, the Academy's chief xenobiologist. "We've always viewed human adaptability as a curious trait, but now we understand it's their greatest strength. They don't just survive challenges, they thrive on them." In the Commandant's office, decisions were being made that would reshape the Academy's future. "We need to completely redesign our training protocols," the Commandant announced to his staff. "Stone didn't just break records, he broke our understanding of what's possible." As the day drew to a close, Rex finally returned to his quarters, passing groups of aliens who parted respectfully before him. He paused briefly at his door, turning to the 3 drill sergeants who had followed him. "You know," he said with a slight smile, "I think I might try for a better time tomorrow. Felt a bit sluggish on some of those turns." The drill sergeants exchanged looks of disbelief as Rex disappeared into his room. In the purple twilight of Nexus 7, they stood in silence, each contemplating how one human cadet had transformed their understanding of the galaxy in just 54 minutes and 12 seconds. The next day's training roster showed a record number of applications. It seemed every cadet in the Academy suddenly wanted to train in the early morning hours, right when a certain human would be running the course again. The galaxy had changed, and somewhere on Earth, in countless other military academies, young human cadets were watching the recordings of Rex's run, grinning with pride and anticipation. Their time in the galaxy was just beginning.